In the farthest reaches of the cosmos, where light travels for ages before reaching willing ears, there exists a record, a living archive of civilizations that have risen and flourished in peaceful harmony. Tonight, we turn our attention to one such world, Thalassara, home to the luminous Andari, a people who learned that wisdom flows like water, gentle and eternal. Their story is one of wonder without struggle, of discovery without striving, a symphony played in the quiet language of the stars. Listen now as the archive opens, as dust of ages settles, and as the voice of a distant world reaches across the void to rest in the sanctuary of your mind. You find yourself suspended in the vast darkness between worlds. Behind you, the infinite tapestry of stars stretches endlessly, points of light scattered across the black canvas like thoughts in the mind of creation. Ahead, a single star gleams with a particular warmth, drawing your gaze as though calling you home to a place you have never been. This star is called Zephyrus, a name that means the singer in the old tongues of many worlds. Its light is golden, tinged with threads of amber and rose, and it burns with a steady, patient flame that has warmed the same cluster of worlds for billions of years. Around this star orbits a planet unlike any other in its system, Thalassara. As you drift closer, the planet reveals itself gradually, as though emerging from a cosmic fog. The first thing that strikes you is its color, not the harsh reds and grays of barren worlds, nor the cold blues of distant ice spheres, but a color that seems to shimmer between turquoise and violet, like the exact moment between dusk and deep night. This shimmering is not a trick of light alone, but the reflection of something extraordinary. Thalassara's oceans, which cover most of its surface, possess a luminescent quality all their own. Bioluminescent organisms dance in those waters, creating waves of soft light that pulse with the rhythm of the tides. The planet turns slowly beneath your viewing. You see continents, landmasses shaped like sleeping creatures or cradled songs, connected by chains of islands that seem to float like thoughts suspended in dream. Where water and land meet, there are no harsh boundaries, but rather gentle transitions marked by coastlines of pearl, white sand, and crystalline rock formations that catch and refract the light of Zephyrus. The atmosphere above Thalassara is clear, though faintly tinged with a lavender hue. Through this shimmering veil, you can make out the outlines of vast weather systems. Not storms, but great spiraling patterns of wind and precipitation that seem almost choreographed, moving with a grace that suggests intelligence or intention. Clouds drift like silk scarves across the sky, catching the light of their world's two moons, which now become visible as they orbit in their slow celestial dance. One moon is pearl, white and substantial. The other is smaller, with a faint greenish luminescence, like a distant emerald held up to the sun. This is Thalassara. This is the world where the Andari have made their home for countless ages. But before you descend to its surface, before you truly begin to understand this civilization and the people who built it, you must understand something fundamental about the cosmic archive itself. The archive is not a place of dust and records, not a library in any conventional sense. Rather, it is a living repository, a consciousness that exists across dimensions, that gathers the essence of great civilizations at the moment they reach their peak, their brightest flowering. And so what you are about to witness is not a historical recounting of events already past, but rather a kind of eternal present, a moment in time preserved in perfect clarity, as real and vivid as memory, yet somehow existing outside the flow of ordinary time. The Andari were such a civilization. At their zenith, they embodied principles so profound, so grounded in peace and harmony, that the archive deemed them worthy of preservation. And now, through this transmission, we invite you to witness them, to observe their world, to understand their ways, to feel the resonance of their existence as it reaches across the ages to touch your consciousness. As you move closer to the planet's surface, as the transmission deepens and your awareness expands to encompass more detail, you begin to perceive the presence of the Andari themselves. They are there, in the cities that glow softly along the coastlines, in the vast gardens that cover the highlands, in the depths of the oceans where their deepest sanctuaries rest. You cannot yet see them clearly, cannot yet hear their voices distinctly, but you can sense them. A presence as calm and pervasive as the air itself, as integral to this world as water or light. They are waiting for you. The image before you clarifies. You are no longer suspended in the void between worlds, but rather positioned as if hovering just above the clouds of Thalassara. Below you, the surface beckons. Oceans that shimmer with inner light, continents that seem to breathe gently with the wind, skies that transition through gradations of color from violet near the horizon to a deep, restful blue above. The sun, Zephyrus, hangs low on the horizon, casting long rays of amber and gold across the landscape. It is that precious time of day called the golden hour, when the light is soft and forgiving, when shadows grow long and thoughtful, when the world seems to pause and reflect upon itself. And in this moment of perfect balance between day and night, you are invited to descend, to leave the cold vastness of space behind, to breathe the air of Thalassara, to hear, for the first time, the voice of the Andari as they prepare to share their story. The journey begins. Your descent through Thalassara's atmosphere is gentle, like a feather settling through still air. The lavender hue of the upper atmosphere gradually deepens, shifting through shades of lilac and indigo as you pass through successive layers of cloud and wind. The temperature around you cools and then warms again, a rhythm as natural as breathing. Below, the planet's surface grows from an abstract pattern of color into something tangible, something real. The first sensation that reaches you as you near the surface is not visual, but auditory. Sound travels upward from below, not the harsh sounds of machinery or conflict, but something far gentler. It is the sound of water. Endless, patient water. The oceans of Thalassara sing to you as you approach, their voices layered and complex, each wave carrying its own melody. It is a sound that seems to have depth and history, as though every drop of water contains the memory of billions of years of gentle motion. You descend further, and now the details of the world reveal themselves in stunning clarity. Thalassara is, above all else, a world of water. Oceans cover nearly 80% of the planet's surface, vast bodies of liquid that shimmer with an inner radiance. This radiance comes not from the reflected light of Zephyrus alone, though the star's warm glow certainly plays its part. Rather, it emanates from within the water itself, millions upon millions of bioluminescent organisms that dwell in these seas, creating a living aurora that pulses with the rhythm of the tides. In daylight, the waters appear as shades of turquoise and jade, with depths of deeper blue and violet visible, where the ocean trenches plunge far below the surface. The clarity of the water is extraordinary. You can perceive structures and movements at depths that would be invisible in Earth's murkiest seas. Vast forests of swaying kelp, like plants, undulate in currents that seem choreographed, their movements synchronized in ways that suggest intelligence, or at least a profound harmony with their environment. Schools of creatures that resemble fish in form, but carry their own luminescence, glide through the water in formations that create patterns of living light. But it is in the approaching evening, as Zephyrus hangs lower on the horizon, that the true magic of Thalassara's oceans becomes apparent. The bioluminescence intensifies, not in competition with the sun's light, but in harmony with it. Waves become trails of liquid starlight, phosphorescent and gentle. Currents glow like veins of molten silver running through the water's body. It is as though the ocean itself is alive with consciousness, thinking in patterns of light and shadow. Along the coastlines, where the water meets the land, entire regions glow with such intensity that they seem to be on fire, but with a fire of ice and starlight rather than heat and flame. You begin to notice that the bioluminescence is not random. It follows patterns. In some regions, the light pulses in rhythms that seem deliberate, almost musical in their timing. In others, it flows in waves that move across the water's surface, like thoughts moving through a mind. Where different currents meet, the lights seem to dance together, creating patterns of such complexity that you find yourself mesmerized by their beauty. It is as though the ocean is communicating, expressing something profound through the language of light. The continents that break the surface of these waters are few but magnificent. They rise from the sea like sleeping leviathans, their profiles gentle and rounded by ages of wind and water. The largest continent, which will later come to be known by many names, stretches across an area roughly equivalent to Earth's North America. Its coastlines are extraordinarily complex, not jagged and hostile, but intricate and welcoming, with countless bays and inlets where the land and sea seem to dance together in an eternal embrace. Along these coastlines, you can now perceive the presence of life in abundance. The beaches are not barren expanses of sand, but rather teeming ecosystems where the boundary between ocean and land is blurred. Creatures emerge from the water onto the shore, but not in the predatory manner of Earth's wildlife. These beings move with grace and apparent purpose. Their interactions with one another and with their environment suggesting a level of awareness and cooperation that transcends simple survival instinct. Some creatures appear to remain partially in the water while interacting with those on land, as though the division between aquatic and terrestrial life is less pronounced here than on other worlds. The highest mountains on Thalassara do not soar dramatically into the sky, but rather rise in graceful sweeps, their peaks dusted with perpetual snow and ice that gleams in the light of Zephyrus like crowns of diamonds. These mountains are not barren and harsh, but clothed in vegetation. Forests cover their slopes, and these forests are unlike any that exist on worlds where violence is the rule. The trees here grow in patterns that suggest intention, almost as though planted by a gardener's hand. Their leaves shimmer with subtle iridescence, catching and reflecting the light in ways that create the illusion of bioluminescence even on land. The colors range from deep emerald to soft silver, from pale gold to the faintest hint of violet. The forests seem to have structure and layers, canopies at different heights, creating a complex ecosystem. You can perceive, even from your vantage point high above, the movement of creatures within the trees, but again these movements seem purposeful and peaceful. There is no sense of predation, no violence in nature. Instead, there seems to be a kind of partnership, a recognition that all beings share the same world and benefit from cooperation rather than competition. Between the mountains lie vast plains and gentle hills. The plains are not barren grasslands, but rather covered with vegetation. Flowers, you realize, flowers that bloom in patterns of such complexity and beauty that they seem less like natural growth and more like a living tapestry woven by an artist of incomparable skill. The flowers are small and abundant, creating waves of color across the landscape. Reds and oranges blend into yellows and golds, which fade into blues and purples, which transition into pinks and magentas, creating a spectrum of color that seems to shift and change as you observe it from different angles. You notice that the flower patterns are not random. They follow the contours of the land in ways that seem deliberate. Ridges of one color mark the courses of ancient rivers. Spirals of flowers seem to radiate from particular focal points, as though organized in sacred geometry. Patches of similar colors cluster together, separated by transitional zones of blended hues. The effect is not chaotic, but rather creates a sense of profound order, as though you are observing not merely a field of wild flowers, but an expression of artistic vision made manifest in living plant matter. The two moons of Thalassara are now visible in the sky, though the larger star Zephyrus still dominates the light. The pearl, white moon, which the Andari call Luminara, hangs in the eastern sky, substantial and serene. The surface of Luminara is visible to you even in daylight. It is marked with patterns of lighter and darker regions that create the impression of a kindly face, a guardian watching over the world below. The smaller moon, Vedessa, with its faint greenish glow, rises in a different part of the sky. Its surface seems to possess a different quality. It appears almost translucent at times, as though it is composed of materials unknown to you, perhaps even existing partially in dimensions you cannot fully perceive. The two celestial bodies cast shadows that create an interplay of light and darkness across the landscape below. It is a sight that speaks to perfect balance. Two heavenly bodies orbiting in harmony, never clashing, never overwhelming one another, but rather creating a system of gentle illumination that ensures the world below is never plunged into complete darkness. The paths of the moons across the sky seem to have been choreographed, their orbits perfect expressions of celestial mathematics that embody both precision and grace. As you descend lower still, you begin to perceive the finer details of the landscape. The coastlines are studded with what appear to be cities, though they are unlike any human settlements. Rather than sprawling outward in concentric patterns or clustering defensively, these cities seem to grow naturally from the landscape, as though the buildings themselves have emerged from the earth like plants. The structures are graceful and flowing, built with materials that reflect light in gentle, diffused ways. Some appear to be constructed from crystalline substances that gleam softly in the fading sunlight. Yet the crystals seem to possess an organic quality, as though they are part of the living landscape rather than alien impositions. Others seem almost organic, as though grown rather than built, their surfaces smooth and undulating like the shells of ancient sea creatures. The roofs curve in gentle arcs. The walls seem to flow and merge with one another rather than standing in rigid opposition. Windows and openings are placed with apparent randomness, yet create a pleasing aesthetic harmony. You cannot perceive any walls, fences, or barriers separating the cities from the surrounding landscape. The urban spaces seem to blend seamlessly with gardens, forests, and water features that integrate the wild and the cultivated into a unified whole. The cities are not dominated by tall towers or imposing fortifications, but rather by gentle domes and flowing arches, by gardens and waterways that seem integrated into every aspect of the urban design. Water flows through the cities not as something contained and controlled, but as a central feature, a living presence. Fountains rise in public spaces, their waters catching the light in displays of liquid artistry. Channels and streams wind through the streets in patterns that seem to follow both practical and aesthetic principles. They provide necessary irrigation and water management while creating spaces of beauty and meditation. The vegetation in and around these cities is equally remarkable. Gardens are everywhere, on rooftops, in courtyards, along the sides of buildings. The plants appear to be cultivated with meticulous care, yet in a way that celebrates their natural forms rather than constraining them. Flowering vines climb the walls of buildings in patterns that seem almost random, yet create a perfect aesthetic harmony. The vines are studded with flowers of such delicacy that they seem barely real, and their perfume, you can almost sense from your vantage point, must fill the air with sweetness. Trees provide shade in public gathering spaces, their branches spreading in graceful arcs that seem designed both to provide shelter and to create visual beauty. Herbs and flowering plants fill raised beds, releasing fragrances into the air that, even from your vantage point high above, seem to reach you with whispers of jasmine, rose, an exotic scents for which you have no names. In the plazas and gathering spaces of the cities, you can perceive what appear to be fountains and water features of remarkable sophistication. Yet these are not merely functional, they are clearly artistic expressions. Water is shaped and guided through geometric patterns and organic curves, creating displays that are constantly in motion yet utterly peaceful to observe. Some fountains seem to pulse in rhythm with the tides below. Others create patterns that reflect and respond to the movements of the moons above. The water itself seems to glow faintly, incorporating the bioluminescent organisms from the seas or reflecting artificial lights in ways that create beauty after darkness falls. The sky above the continents is remarkably clear, yet not empty. You can see, floating above the landscape in various locations, structures that appear to be suspended in air. They are enormous, far larger than the cities below, yet they seem to defy gravity as naturally as clouds. Their surfaces are smooth and organic in appearance, and light plays across them in ways that suggest they are made of materials unfamiliar to you. Some glow faintly with inner luminescence, suggesting that they generate or contain their own light source. Others are translucent, allowing the sky to shine through them, creating the effect of seeing through vast crystalline lenses. These aerial structures are spaced far apart, positioned in what seems to be a carefully planned arrangement that incorporates both practical and aesthetic considerations. They do not appear to be haphazardly scattered, but rather positioned to create a sense of balance and harmony when viewed from any angle. These aerial structures are connected to the cities below by what appear to be beams of light or energy. Not visible in the conventional sense, but perceptible as disturbances in the air, like heat shimmer, but more refined and elegant. These connections seem to be active and purposeful, suggesting that the aerial structures are integral to the functioning of the civilization below, yet without the harsh, industrial appearance of Earth's infrastructure. If anything, these light beams seem to enhance the beauty of the landscape, creating lines of grace that connect the cities to the sky. As evening settles across Thalassara, the true magic of the night begins to become apparent. Zephyrus, the golden star, sinks toward the horizon, painting the sky in increasingly warm tones. Gold bleeding into orange, orange into red, red into deep crimson. The gradient of color is smooth and natural, yet simultaneously so vivid that it seems almost unreal. The clouds near the horizon catch the light and appear to be made of pure fire, yet the fire is cool, inviting, peaceful rather than threatening. The two moons, freed from the overwhelming brilliance of the sun, begin to shine more vividly. Luminara's white light is steady and nurturing, like a mother's gaze watching over sleeping children. Odessa's greenish glow creates a complementary illumination, not harsh or discordant, but rather blending with Luminara's white to create regions of soft turquoise and pale lilac. The combination of the two moons' light is sufficient to illuminate the landscape as though it were lit by a gentle, ethereal lantern. Shadows are present, but never harsh, never creating deep darkness. Every feature of the landscape remains visible, yet surrounded by an atmosphere of mystery and peace. But the most remarkable transformation is in the waters. As the sun approaches the horizon and the sky begins its transition toward true night, the bioluminescence in the oceans intensifies dramatically. The waters begin to glow with their own light, creating patterns that seem to pulse and flow with intention. Waves of light roll across the surface like thoughts moving through a mind. Currents glow more brightly, becoming rivers of starlight flowing through the deeper darkness. The underwater regions that you can perceive through the clear water shimmer with countless organisms, each contributing its own light to the collective radiance. The bioluminescence seems to follow patterns that are not random. In certain areas, the light pulses in rhythms that seem almost musical. In others, it creates standing waves of illumination that remain stable despite the movement of the water itself. You begin to perceive that this is not merely a beautiful natural phenomenon, but possibly a form of communication. A language written in light by the billions of organisms that dwell in Thalassara's oceans. From the cities and settlements, new lights begin to emerge as darkness falls. These are not artificial lights in the harsh sense of electric illumination, but rather a gentle, warm radiance that seems to come from the buildings themselves. It is as though the structures are alive, capable of responding to the changing light of the sky, awakening as the sun sleeps. The lights are coordinated in a way that suggests intention, creating patterns that are beautiful to observe. Waves of warm light moving through the cities in sequence, or gentle pulses that seem to synchronize with the rhythm of the tides and the celestial movements overhead. The lights in the cities are warm, oranges and golds and soft ambers, creating a sense of comfort and welcome. Yet they are not so bright as to hurt the eyes or dominate the landscape. Instead, They enhance and complement the light of the moons and the bioluminescence of the oceans, creating a unified lighting scheme that encompasses the entire world. It is as though Thalassara as a whole, land, sea, sky, and civilization, is engaged in a coordinated act of illumination, each element contributing to a greater whole. You begin to hear the sounds of Thalassara more distinctly now. The wind moves through the forests and across the plains, and it carries with it an almost musical quality, not random noise, but something that suggests harmony and pattern. The wind seems to carry with it the sense of the flowers and the forests, creating an olfactory landscape as complex as the visual one. The waters continue their ceaseless song, their rhythms varying from place to place, deep and resonant in the trenches, lighter and more playful in the shallows. In some areas, the sound of waves breaking on shore creates a rhythm that seems deliberately timed, as though the oceans themselves are keeping time for some vast symphony. And beneath these natural sounds, you begin to perceive something else, the presence of conscious life, the distant hum of activity, voices that might be singing or speaking in a language you do not yet understand, but whose emotional content is clear. This is a civilization at peace with itself and with its world. The voices do not sound rushed or stressed, but rather calm and purposeful. There is laughter in some areas and meditation in others. There is conversation and collaboration, the sounds of work being done joyfully rather than as burden or necessity. The air itself seems to carry a quality that is hard to describe in conventional terms. It is clean and pure. Certainly, there is no sense of pollution or harm, but it is more than that. It is as though the atmosphere has been carefully cultivated, maintained, and cared for in the way a gardener tends to a beloved garden. The air tastes, metaphorically, of growing things, of the sea, of the stars. It carries fragrances from the flowers and the forests, mixed with the salt and complexity of the oceans. It is an air that seems to nourish rather than merely sustain. As night fully descends, you find yourself in a landscape of almost impossible beauty. Above, the stars emerge in the clearing sky, more stars than you have ever seen, it seems, though that is perhaps merely a function of Thalassara's clear atmosphere and the absence of any light pollution. The celestial sphere is not dark, but rather a palette of countless hues. Deep purples and blues near the horizon transitioning to true black in the zenith overhead. Yet even this apparent black is studded with stars of such abundance and variety that it seems the sky itself is alive with light. Some stars burn white and fierce, others glow in shades of red and orange, still others shine with blue and violet light. The effect is mesmerizing, as though you have been transported into the mind of creation itself and are observing the thoughts of the universe taking form. The two moons continue their celestial dance, and their combined light is sufficient to illuminate the landscape below in shades of silver and blue. Below, the cities glow with their gentle, warm radiance, like scattered jewels on a bed of living water. The oceans continue their luminescent display, wave after wave of bioluminescent light, painting the surface with patterns of such complexity that they seem to contain meaning, as though they are a language written in light and darkness. The combination of all these light sources, the stars above, the moons, the cities, the bioluminescence of the oceans, the subtle radiance from the forests and gardens, creates a landscape that is simultaneously fully illuminated and mysteriously shadowed. There is no harsh contrast, no stark division between light and darkness, but rather a seamless blend where every point of light seems to enhance rather than diminish those around it. And you understand, in this moment, that what you are witnessing is not merely a world, not merely a physical place, but a living system in which every element, the stars above, the moons in their orbits, the oceans and continents, the forests and gardens, the cities and their inhabitants, all move together in a harmony so complete and profound that it has achieved the status of symphony. Every element responds to every other element. Every being, from the smallest bioluminescent organism in the deepest ocean trench to the greatest structure floating in the sky, plays its part in creating a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. This is Thalassara. This is the world where the Andari have learned to live, not as conquerors or builders imposing their will upon the landscape, but as participants in a vast and ancient dance, moving in rhythm with the heartbeat of their world, guided by the light of their stars, cradled by the arms of their oceans, and united by a vision of life so beautiful and complete that it touches something deep within your own consciousness. As you continue to drift above the landscape, watching the interplay of light and shadow, hearing the symphony of wind and water and distant voices, you feel yourself begin to relax into this moment. The tensions and concerns of the outside universe seem to fall away. Here, in this place, there is only peace, only harmony, only the gentle unfolding of a world that has learned the deepest secrets of existence. How to flourish without struggle, how to grow without conquest, how to be without ceasing to become. The night deepens. The stars wheel slowly overhead in their eternal arcs. The moons continue their orbits, each one tracing a path that seems to have been written into the fabric of reality since before time began. The tides respond to their gravity, ebbing and flowing in rhythms that have been measured in eons. And you, suspended above this paradise, begin to understand that you have arrived at a destination not merely of geographical significance, but of spiritual importance. You have been invited to witness something precious, something that exists in the archive not merely as historical record, but as a gift, a reminder that such worlds, such civilizations, such harmony is possible. That peace is not merely a human ideal or a philosophical abstraction, but a tangible reality that can be achieved and sustained across an entire world. And so you settle into this moment, allowing the beauty and peace of Thalassara to wash over you, to flow into you, to become, for a time, part of your own essence. The journey into sleep has truly begun. The ocean's gentle song continues its ancient melody, and you drift into dreams as though floating on currents of starlight. Time is the greatest teacher, and on Thalassara, time has been abundant. Before there were cities of crystal and light. Before there were gardens of cultivated beauty and aerial structures that touched the sky, there existed only the world itself, the oceans and continents in their primal state, the two moons orbiting in their ancient dance, the star Zephyris burning with its patient golden flame. And from this world, over the course of ages beyond counting, the Andari emerged. The story of their origin is shrouded in the mists of antiquity, yet traces of it remain in the memory of the civilization. Preserved in art and song, and the collective consciousness of a people who have learned to value their own history as though it were a sacred text. The Andari did not arrive on Thalassara from elsewhere in the cosmos, though such journeys would later become possible for them. Rather, they arose from the world itself, born from the complex interactions of water and chemistry and the subtle forces that give rise to consciousness from the inanimate realm. In the very earliest epochs, they were simple creatures dwelling in the oceans. They possessed no structures, no language in any conventional sense, no aspirations beyond the basic necessities of existence. Yet even in these primitive forms, the Andari possessed something unique, a sensitivity to their environment that transcended mere survival instinct. They responded not only to hunger and danger, but to beauty, to harmony, to the music of the waves and the patterns of light and darkness created by the distant moons. Over vast stretches of time, not thousands of years, but millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years, the Andari evolved. Yet their evolution did not follow the pattern of violence and competition that dominates so many worlds. Instead, there seems to have been a cooperative element woven into their nature from the very beginning. They developed increasingly sophisticated means of communicating with one another, not through conflict or dominance hierarchies, but through harmonization. Their earliest vocalizations were not cries of aggression, but songs, attempts to synchronize their movements with others through the medium of sound. The water itself became their first instrument. In the depths of the ocean, the Andari discovered that their voices could travel vast distances through the medium of water, that they could create patterns of vibration and resonance that carried meaning and emotion. Over countless generations, they refined this ability, developing a language of extraordinary sophistication. A language that was simultaneously linguistic and musical, carrying information while also expressing feeling and aesthetic appreciation. As the Andari's consciousness deepened and their numbers grew, they began to shape their immediate environment, not through conquest or exploitation, but through careful, respectful collaboration. They cultivated the forests of kelp and other aquatic plants, guiding their growth toward particular forms, not for domination, but for mutual benefit. They established relationships with other species of ocean-dwelling creatures, discovering that cooperation was more rewarding than competition. They developed an understanding of the cycles of the ocean, the tides driven by the moons, the seasonal patterns of water temperature and current, the rhythms of life and death and renewal that characterized their world. Then came a pivotal moment in the history of the Andari. At some point in their development, they emerged from the oceans onto the land. This was not a violent migration or a desperate expansion into new territory, but rather a gradual exploration, an opening of consciousness to encompass new possibilities. The first Andari to venture onto the dry land discovered that the world above the waves was as rich and complex as the realm below. They found forests and mountains, deserts and meadows, all with their own ecosystems, their own beauties, their own challenges and opportunities. The transition from ocean to land dweller was not instantaneous, but rather took place over generations as the Andari developed new forms and abilities. They learned to breathe air as well as extract oxygen from water. They developed limbs suited for both swimming and walking. They grew eyes that could see as clearly in the air as in the water. And most importantly, they brought with them the wisdom they had accumulated in the oceans, the understanding of harmony the valuing of cooperation, the recognition that beauty and peace were not obstacles to survival, but rather pathways to deeper fulfillment. When the Andari finally established their first permanent settlements on land, they did not build fortifications or weapons. Instead, they built gardens. They created spaces of beauty and contemplation. They constructed dwellings that harmonized with the landscape rather than dominating it. And they continued to sing. The same songs that had filled the oceans now resonated across mountains and valleys, carried on the wind, echoing from stone and leaf and sky. The period that followed, the age that Andari historians and poets refer to as the time of flowering, was one of extraordinary cultural and intellectual development. The Andari did not invent technology in the conventional sense, with all the competition and warfare that typically accompanied such development on other worlds. Instead, they discovered how to work with the natural forces of their world, how to amplify and direct them toward purposes of beauty and harmony. They learned to cultivate the bioluminescent organisms of their oceans, creating vast gardens of living light beneath the waves. They discovered how to build structures that would last for eons, not through the application of brutal force or the exploitation of resources, but through a deep understanding of how materials naturally cohered, how water and stone and crystalline structures could be encouraged to grow and interweave in ways that enhanced rather than interrupted the beauty of the landscape. They developed a written language that was itself an art form, a system of symbols and marks that conveyed meaning through their inherent visual beauty as much as through their semantic content. Reading a text became an aesthetic experience, not merely an informational one. Mathematics was developed not as a tool of commerce or warfare, but as an exploration of the patterns that underlay all of existence. The Andari mathematicians became artists, creating proofs that were as beautiful to contemplate as paintings or sculptures. Music became central to Andari civilization in a way that is difficult to explain to those who have not experienced it. It was not merely entertainment or emotional expression, though it was certainly both of those things. Rather, music became a form of collective consciousness, a way for the Andari to synchronize their thinking and feeling with one another across vast distances. When the evening came and the cities began their daily ritual of coordinated illumination, the Andari would sing together, thousands or millions of voices creating harmonies of extraordinary complexity and beauty. These songs served multiple purposes. They were records of history, epic poems set to music, preserving the memory of important events and cultural achievements. They were expressions of spirituality, songs of reverence for the natural world and the cosmic forces that governed it. They were celebrations of community and connection, affirmations that the Andari were part of something greater than themselves, woven into a fabric of existence that transcended individual consciousness. One particular discovery during this era would prove to have profound consequences for Andari civilization. Through careful observation and experimentation, the Andari realized that the bioluminescence in the oceans was not random, but rather responsive to certain vibrations in the water. When they sang particular frequencies, the organisms would respond, creating patterns of light that seemed to echo and amplify the music. It was as though the ocean itself was joining in the chorus, adding its voice to theirs. This realization led to one of the most significant developments in Andari history: the creation of what they called the tidal resonance, a form of communication that united the consciousness of the entire civilization. Through careful coordination of song and vibration, the Andari discovered that they could establish connections with the bioluminescent organisms on a scale that transcended the individual and even transcended the local community. By synchronizing their music with particular frequencies, they created what amounted to a planetary scale information network, using the organisms themselves as both medium and amplifier. The tidal resonance allowed the Andari to share knowledge, emotions, and experiences across vast distances without any technological infrastructure, beyond their own voices and their understanding of how to work with natural systems. A scientist making a discovery in one region could share their findings instantly with researchers on the other side of the world. An artist could broadcast their creations to audiences spanning entire continents. A philosopher could engage in dialogue with thinkers separated by thousands of miles of ocean. Yet the tidal resonance was never used as a tool of control or domination. The Andari maintained a deep respect for individual autonomy and choice. The resonance was always available, always open, but no Andari was compelled to participate. Those who wished to remain isolated or to pursue their own thoughts in silence were respected and accommodated. The system was designed to enhance rather than constrain, to offer possibilities rather than imposing limitations. Over time, the Andari civilization developed into something uniquely beautiful. They had cities, but the cities were integrated seamlessly into the natural landscape. They had technology, but the technology was organic and sustainable, powered by the energy of their star and the natural processes of their world. They had science and learning, but these were pursued not out of a desire to dominate nature or each other, but out of a genuine curiosity about the universe and their place within it. The Andari also developed a sophisticated system of governance, or rather, a system of non-governance that was governance nonetheless. They did not have rulers or hierarchies. Instead, they operated through consensus achieved through their songs and the tidal resonance. When a major decision needed to be made, the entire civilization would engage in a kind of collective contemplation. Ideas would be expressed through art and music and poetry. Alternatives would be explored through shared consciousness. And through this process, a consensus would emerge, not imposed from above, but arising organically from the collective wisdom of the people. The Andari's relationship with time itself was transformed as their civilization developed. They did not view time as something to be conquered or used efficiently, but rather as a river to be floated upon, to be observed and appreciated for its own sake. They measured time in ways that aligned with natural cycles, the orbits of the moons, the rotation of the seasons, the pulses of the tides. Their calendars were not mere tools of administration, but works of art, incorporating mathematical patterns and artistic designs that made the passage of time into a form of poetry. Death and aging, which create such anguish and struggle on many worlds, were viewed by the Andari with a different kind of understanding. They saw that death was not an ending, but a transformation, a return to the larger cycles of existence. When an Andari reached the end of their life, they would often choose to undergo a final transformation, a return to the oceans, a dissolution of their individual form into the larger consciousness from which all life arose. Some would sing their final songs on the shore, their voices carrying across the water as their bodies slowly merged with the landscape. Others would venture deep into the forests and mountains, finding places of particular beauty to await the completion of their journey. In all cases, death was met not with fear or despair, but with a sense of completion and peace. Gradually, the Andari's understanding of their own nature and abilities expanded beyond the boundaries of their home world. They developed the means to travel to the other worlds in their star system, not through the violent exploration that characterized many civilizations, but through peaceful, respectful journeys. On each world they visited, they sought only to understand and appreciate, never to exploit or dominate. They discovered that this approach opened doors that conquest and colonization would have forever closed. The Andari became known throughout their system not as invaders or conquerors, but as observers and friends, as beings who came to learn and to share in the wonder of creation. Yet despite their technological capabilities and their expanding reach, the Andari never lost sight of their home world. Thalassara remained the center of their civilization, the wellspring from which their culture and spirituality flowed. The cities grew more beautiful, the gardens more intricate, the music more profound, but always in harmony with the world itself, never in conflict with it. The Andari understood that their greatest achievement was not any particular creation or discovery, but rather the achievement of balance. The creation of a civilization that could flourish without destroying, that could grow without depleting, that could dream without enslaving. The ages passed, and Thalassara itself seemed to respond to the presence of the Andari. The oceans grew richer in their bioluminescence, as though responding to the songs that filled the air with harmonics. The flowers in the meadows developed colors of increasing subtlety and beauty. The forests grew taller and more majestic. The mountains seemed to breathe in synchrony with the civilization that dwelled upon them. It became impossible to say where nature ended and culture began, where the wild world terminated and the cultivated civilization started. They were one thing, a unified expression of consciousness and beauty. And through all of this vast sweep of history, the Andari maintained their core understanding, the principle that had guided them since they first emerged from the primordial oceans. They had learned that to sing in the tides was to participate in a larger song, one that encompassed all of existence. To add one's voice to the chorus was to affirm one's connection to all other beings, all other consciousness, all other expressions of life and light and love. This understanding was not religious in any dogmatic sense, but rather a practical recognition of the fundamental truth of existence, that separation is an illusion, that all beings are interconnected, and that the path to deepest fulfillment lies in recognizing and honoring that connection. By the time the cosmic archive turned its attention to Thalassara and deemed the civilization worthy of preservation, the Andari had been on their world for an almost inconceivably vast period of time. Yet they had not achieved some final static perfection. Rather, they remained in a state of dynamic evolution, constantly discovering new depths to their understanding, new possibilities for beauty and harmony. They were not gods. They remained beings with limitations and challenges. But they had achieved something that most civilizations never attain: a sustainable balance between growth and stability, between individual expression and collective harmony, between aspiration and contentment. And so, the story of how the Andari learned to sing in the tides is, in its essence, the story of how a species learned to listen to their world, to listen to each other, to listen to the vast and ancient song that plays through all of creation. In learning to listen truly, they learned to add their voices in ways that enhanced rather than disrupted, that contributed rather than detracted. They learned that the deepest form of singing was not about projecting one's own voice loudly, but about finding one's place in a chorus so vast and complex that it incorporated all of existence. This understanding, preserved in the cosmic archive, stands as an invitation to all other civilizations, a reminder that a different path is possible, that violence and competition need not be the foundation of conscious development, that a species can create beauty and achievement and meaning without building its success on the suffering of others. The Andari sang their tides into being, and in doing so, they created not only a great civilization, but a testament to what consciousness itself is capable of achieving when guided by wisdom, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to beauty and harmony. The ocean continues to sing. The cities continue to glow with their gentle light. The moons continue their eternal dance. And within the cosmic archive, the memory of this song persists, waiting, patient, hoping that someday another world, another civilization might hear it and understand that such harmony is not merely the stuff of fantasy, but a tangible possibility, a potential that exists within the heart of every conscious being who chooses to seek it. Imagine a city where the boundaries between structure and nature have dissolved into something neither wholly artificial nor entirely wild, but rather a seamless weaving of intention and growth. This is Aeluna, the crown jewel of Andari civilization, nestled along a coastline where 3 great rivers flow into the ocean and where the bioluminescent tides reach their greatest intensity. To understand Aeluna is to understand how the Andari have chosen to live, how they have built their culture, not in defiance of their world, but in profound collaboration with it. As you descend toward the city, the first thing you perceive is not walls or gates, or the harsh geometric patterns of conventional urban planning. Instead, you encounter a landscape that appears almost untouched, a natural paradise that gradually reveals itself to be, in fact, the city itself. The transition is so subtle that you might not realize you have crossed from wilderness into civilization until you begin to notice the careful orchestration of every element. The trees are not randomly scattered, but arranged in patterns that maximize both their beauty and their functional benefit. The water features, streams, fountains, and pools are positioned to serve both practical and aesthetic purposes. The pathways that connect different areas are not paved with harsh materials, but rather flow like the natural courses of water, bordered by plants that guide the eye and feet alike. The architecture of Aeluna is organic and flowing. The buildings themselves seem to have grown rather than been constructed, their walls curved and undulating like the shells of sea creatures or the formations of crystalline structures. Many of the structures incorporate natural elements directly into their design. Trees grow through and around buildings, their branches forming natural ceilings and walls. Water channels run through the interiors of buildings, their gentle sounds providing a constant, soothing background to daily life. The materials used in construction are primarily stone, crystal, and what appears to be a cultivated form of coral-like substance that has been grown and shaped over years or decades to form particular structures. The coloration of the buildings varies across the spectrum, but always in muted, harmonious tones that complement rather than dominate the natural landscape. Some buildings glow with a warm amber or gold, as though they contain the light of Zephyrus within them. Others shimmer with subtle blues and greens, reflecting the colors of the oceans and forests. Still others are nearly translucent, allowing you to see through them to the landscape beyond. The effect is of a city that is simultaneously present and invisible, that declares its existence while remaining humble before the greater beauty of its surroundings. The central plaza of Aeluna is perhaps the most extraordinary feature of the city. It is vast, large enough to accommodate tens of thousands of beings, yet paradoxically intimate in its design. At the center rises a structure that appears to be simultaneously a fountain, a musical instrument, and a work of living art. Water flows from countless openings in elaborate patterns, creating cascades and arcs of liquid that catch the light in dazzling displays. Yet the water does not simply fall. It flows according to a carefully designed system of channels and pathways, seeming to respond to the rhythm of some vast heartbeat. Every few moments, the water flows differently, creating new patterns and designs. Some of these patterns appear random, while others seem to embody mathematical principles or artistic designs of extraordinary sophistication. The music emanating from this central structure is extraordinary. The flowing water creates tones and harmonies as it moves, strikes different surfaces, and falls into pools at varying depths. Yet the sounds are not chaotic or cacophonous. Rather, they cohere into melodies of surprising sophistication and beauty. Sometimes the music seems to echo the calls of creatures in the surrounding forests. Sometimes it appears to respond to the tides, its rhythms synchronizing with the movements of water in the oceans beyond the city. Sometimes it seems almost to anticipate weather changes, shifting its tones moments before the wind patterns shift or rain approaches. Surrounding this central fountain, music, sculpture are stepped areas that serve as gathering spaces. These are not bleachers or audience areas in the conventional sense, but rather comfortable spaces where beings can rest, converse, or simply sit in contemplation. The surfaces are smooth and warm to the touch, as though the stone itself has been cultivated to provide comfort. Vegetation grows in and around these gathering spaces. Flowers bloom in profusion, releasing fragrances that seem designed to calm and focus the mind. Small waterfalls and streams cascade nearby, their sounds creating a natural white noise that encourages relaxation and deep thought. Beyond the central plaza, the city spreads outward in a pattern that appears random, but is actually highly intentional. There are areas dedicated to gardens, vast spaces where the Andari cultivate not merely food, but also beauty. These gardens are unlike any agricultural areas on other worlds. Rather than being organized in neat rows or utilitarian patterns, the gardens are designed to be beautiful as well as productive. Flowering plants grow alongside vegetables and herbs. Trees bear both fruit and spectacular blooms. The gardens are arranged in patterns that create visual harmony, color gradients that blend smoothly from one hue to another, spatial arrangements that please the eye while maximizing sunlight and water availability. Within these gardens, you perceive movement. Andari engaged in the work of cultivation. They move with grace and purpose, tending to plants not with the harsh efficiency of industrial agriculture, but rather with evident care and affection. They speak softly to the plants. Their voice is gentle and encouraging. They water and prune with an artist's touch, considering not merely the productivity of each plant, but its aesthetic contribution to the greater design. They sing as they work, songs that seem to encourage growth, to harmonize their efforts with the natural cycles of plant development and maturation. Other areas of Aeluna are dedicated to dwellings. The homes here are remarkably diverse in design, yet they maintain an overall aesthetic harmony. Some are simple structures, barely more than graceful curves of stone or crystal providing shelter and basic comfort. Others are more elaborate, incorporating multiple levels, intricate interior passages, and spaces designed for specific purposes, yet all share certain characteristics. All incorporate natural light and ventilation. All are positioned to harmonize with the landscape rather than dominate it. All seem designed to be habitable for extended periods without artificial systems, staying naturally cool or warm depending on season and climate. The interiors of Andari homes are as carefully designed as the exteriors. Rooms flow into one another with few clear boundaries. Water features, small fountains, streams, or reflecting pools are often incorporated into living spaces. Natural materials dominate: stone, wood, crystal, and plants. Furnishings are minimal but beautiful, chosen for both functionality and aesthetic appeal. Bedding, where present, seems designed for comfort while maintaining a connection to the natural world. Sleeping surfaces, covered with soft materials derived from plants and water creatures, positioned near windows or water features. The overall effect is of spaces that are simultaneously completely modern and entirely natural, that provide comfort without excess, luxury without wastefulness. The Andari themselves, visible now as you move through the city, are beings of remarkable grace and beauty. Their forms are humanoid in general structure, but with distinctive features that mark them as adapted to their world. Their skin possesses a subtle luminescence, particularly visible in twilight and darkness, as though they contain within themselves a faint echo of the bioluminescence that characterizes their world. Their eyes are large and reflective, capable of seeing in very dim light, but also able to perceive subtle colors and details invisible to beings from harsher worlds. Their bodies are lithe and supple, capable of both extraordinary grace and considerable strength, though this strength is rarely, if ever, used in any way that harms other beings. The Andari wear clothing, though the garments are quite different from those on most other worlds. Rather than being primarily protective, the clothing is decorative and communicative. The fabrics seem to shimmer with subtle colors, blues and greens and purples, that shift depending on angle and light. Some garments incorporate patterns that appear almost to move, creating the illusion of flowing water or dancing leaves. Many Andari wear garments that seem to be woven from natural fibers or even living material, vines or crystalline structures that have been carefully cultivated and shaped. The effect is that each Andari's clothing is part of their individual expression, while simultaneously harmonizing with the greater aesthetic of the city. The Andari move through their city with unhurried grace. There is no sense of rushing or stress, no evidence of time pressure or deadline urgency. Instead, movements are measured and purposeful, as though each action has been considered and chosen with intention. Groups of Andari gather in various spaces throughout the city, sometimes in conversation, sometimes in collaborative work, sometimes in what appears to be meditation or artistic creation. The interactions you observe are gentle and respectful. There is laughter, certainly, but it is warm and inclusive rather than mocking. There are discussions and apparent disagreements, but these are conducted with curiosity and a genuine desire to understand the other perspective, rather than to win a debate or prove superiority. One remarkable aspect of daily life in Aeluna is the attention paid to the rhythms of light and darkness. As the evening approaches and Zephyris sinks toward the horizon, the entire city seems to shift into a different mode. The pace of activity slows. Work-focused tasks are completed, and the focus shifts toward leisure, community, and contemplation. The artificial lights of the city, if they can be called artificial, as they seem to emanate from the buildings themselves, rather than being externally mounted, begin to grow more intense, creating a warm glow throughout the urban spaces. As true darkness falls and the moons rise, the city undergoes a subtle but profound transformation. Certain areas become focal points for community gathering. In the central plaza, the fountain, music, sculpture continues its endless performance, its music seeming to respond to and interact with the movements of the moons and stars above. Around this central structure, Andari gather in increasing numbers as evening progresses. They settle into the comfortable seating areas, arranging themselves in loose groups or sitting in solitary contemplation. The gathering in the plaza is unlike any mass gathering on other worlds. There is no jostling or competition for space. There is no apparent leadership or directed organization. Yet somehow, an order emerges naturally. The Andari arrange themselves in patterns that seem to have aesthetic significance, creating visual designs and spatial relationships that please the eye. Some appear to move into position in response to unspoken signals or shared understanding. Others seem to be following guidance from the music itself, positioning themselves in ways that create harmony with the sounds emanating from the central structure. As more Andari gather, the silence deepens. It is not an absence of sound. There is always the music of the fountains, the gentle movement of water, the whisper of wind through vegetation, but rather a profound quietness where the constant low, level noise of most cities is absent. Conversations, if they occur, are conducted in hushed tones. Movement is minimal and graceful. The entire gathering takes on the quality of a meditation or a religious ceremony, though it appears to be neither formally organized nor directed toward any specific external goal. Then, at some signal imperceptible to the outside observer, the Andari begin to sing. The voices start slowly, almost imperceptibly, a single individual beginning a melody that is almost too soft to hear. Then a second voice joins, adding harmony to the initial melody. A third voice enters, creating a more complex chord. Gradually, others add their voices, building layer upon layer of sound. The final result is a choir of extraordinary complexity and beauty, yet somehow completely natural and unforced. Each voice seems to know exactly where to fit in the greater whole, what note to sing, what harmony to add. There is no apparent conductor or organization, yet the result is perfectly coordinated. The songs themselves seem to be simultaneously ancient and newly created. Some portions appear to be preserved traditional melodies, passed down through generations of Andari. Yet within these traditional structures, individual voices seem to improvise and create new variations, weaving personal expression into the collective performance. The effect is that the songs are both constant and ever changing, familiar and new, individual and collective all at once. As the singing continues, something extraordinary occurs. The bioluminescent organisms in the waters beyond the city seem to respond. The glow of the ocean intensifies, pulsing in rhythm with the Andari voices. The light patterns shift and change, seeming to echo and amplify the musical patterns. It becomes impossible to tell whether the Andari are responding to the light of the ocean, or the ocean is responding to the music of the Andari. They are one thing, a unified expression of sound and light, consciousness and nature. The marketplace of Aeluna is another fascinating aspect of daily life. Yet, it is unlike any commercial space on other worlds. There are no aggressive sales tactics or competitive pricing. There are no displays designed to manipulate or lure buyers into unnecessary purchases. Instead, goods are arranged in beautiful, organized spaces. Different categories of items are clustered together. Food items in one area, crafted goods in another, art and decorative objects in yet another. The vendors themselves seem more interested in discussing their wares, sharing their knowledge, and connecting with community members than in maximizing sales or profit. The goods themselves reflect the values of Andari society. Food items are beautifully presented, often arranged in patterns that are as much art as practical display. Crafted items, tools, clothing, household goods are beautiful and functional simultaneously. Art objects are abundant. Sculptures of crystal or stone, paintings and drawings, pieces of music notation transformed into visual art. The marketplace feels like an extension of the city's galleries and parks, a space for both commerce and community interaction, for both practical necessity and aesthetic appreciation. The systems by which goods are exchanged are unique and remarkably smooth. There is no apparent currency or bartering in the conventional sense. Instead, the Andari seem to operate on a system of mutual contribution and trust. Those who create goods of value freely share them. Those who consume goods freely contribute their own talents and labor to the community. Some appear to work more than others, but this does not seem to create tension or resentment. Instead, it appears to be accepted as a natural reflection of individual choice and capacity. Deeper within the city lie spaces dedicated to learning, art, and spiritual development. These areas are remarkable in their beauty and thoughtfulness. Libraries exist, spaces where knowledge is preserved and organized. But these are not austere halls of study. Rather, they are beautiful spaces where reading takes place surrounded by gardens, near flowing water, with natural light carefully designed to enhance rather than strain the eyes. The knowledge preserved in these libraries seems to cover vast domains: history and science, art and philosophy, practical knowledge about agriculture and engineering alongside purely theoretical and spiritual pursuits. Artistic spaces are equally abundant. Studios where sculptors work can be found throughout the city, many of them open to public viewing. Andari engaged in creative work seem unconcerned with observers, yet welcoming to those who wish to watch and learn. Music studios echo with practice sessions where individuals and small groups refine their artistic abilities. Theatre spaces exist, though the performances seem to be collaborative creations. where the line between performer and audience is blurred, where all participants contribute to the creative experience. The spiritual or contemplative spaces in Aeluna are perhaps the most beautiful of all. These are areas dedicated to meditation, reflection, and connection with forces or principles felt to transcend the physical world. The spaces are designed to facilitate such connection through positioning, aligned with stars or other celestial bodies, through acoustical design, spaces where sound resonates in particular ways, through aesthetic beauty that inspires awe and wonder, and through the integration of natural elements, as particularly water and light, that seem to facilitate deeper states of consciousness. One particularly sacred space in Aeluna is positioned at the meeting point of the three rivers that flow into the ocean. Here, a temple or sanctuary of extraordinary beauty rises, though calling it a temple perhaps imposes too much structure on what is actually a fluid, flowing space. The structure seems to have grown from the earth itself, its walls curved and organic, its interior spaces flowing into one another without clear demarcation. Water flows through the structure in multiple directions, sometimes defying apparent gravity, sometimes creating patterns and designs that seem to carry symbolic significance. The interior is illuminated not by artificial light, but by natural phosphorescence, by the light of the moons and stars filtered through carefully positioned openings, and by the intrinsic luminescence of the materials from which the structure is built. Andari come to this space in solitude and in groups at various times of day and night. Some sit in meditation, their eyes closed, their breathing deep and measured. Some walk slowly through the spaces, pausing to contemplate particular views or to listen to sounds that seem to carry particular significance. Some come to perform rituals or ceremonies, the purposes and meanings of which are apparent only from the reverence with which they are conducted. Others come simply to be present in a space of transcendent beauty, to allow such beauty to wash over them and transform them on subtle levels. The children of Aeluna are visible throughout the city, and their presence adds another dimension to understanding how Andari society functions. The young ones move through the city with apparent freedom. There are no schools or institutions segregating them from adult society, no age-based hierarchies restricting their access to spaces. Instead, they move alongside adults, participating in community gatherings, observing and learning from artistic and spiritual practices, gradually acquiring knowledge and skills through immersion in the culture of their society. Yet they also have spaces designed specifically for their needs, areas where play and exploration are encouraged, where risks can be taken safely, where creativity and curiosity are celebrated without judgment or pressure. The relationships between adults and children appear to be fundamentally different from those on many other worlds. There is no sense of strict hierarchy or command-based authority. Instead, interactions are based on guidance, suggestion, and modeling. Adult Andari seem to present possibilities to younger ones, to demonstrate ways of being and doing, to invite participation in meaningful activities. The children, in turn, seem to respond with natural respect and curiosity, following the guidance offered without needing external enforcement or threats of punishment. As you wander through the various neighborhoods of Aeluna, you begin to understand something profound about how this civilization has chosen to organize itself. There is abundance without waste, organization without oppression, specialization without inequality. Different areas of the city serve different functions and foster different types of activity, yet there is no sense of separation or hierarchy between these areas. The marketplace is not less important than the temple. The residential areas not less valued than the gathering spaces. The infrastructure of the city, water systems, pathways, waste management, seems to function smoothly and efficiently, yet there is no visible evidence of the industrial processes that maintain it. The care taken in every detail of the city is remarkable. The paths are smooth and pleasant to walk upon, yet never so perfect as to seem artificial or inhuman. The gardens are cultivated with evident care, yet maintain enough wildness and spontaneity to feel alive rather than controlled. The buildings are functional and beautiful, meeting practical needs while delighting the aesthetic sense. The systems and processes that keep the city functioning seem to be seamlessly integrated with the natural world, enhancing rather than disrupting the environment. Water management in Aeluna is particularly elegant. The 3 rivers that flow through and beyond the city are not dammed or channeled into rigid concrete courses. Instead, they flow with apparent freedom, yet guided by subtle landscaping and design to serve the city's needs. Water is abundant and freely available. Fountains and streams can be found throughout the public spaces, and homes seem to have ready access to fresh water. Yet there is no sense of wastefulness or excess. The amount used appears perfectly calibrated to what is needed, no more, no less. Waste and recycling are handled in ways that are invisible to the casual observer. There is no garbage visible anywhere in Aeluna. Yet the city is clearly inhabited and maintained. The apparent contradiction resolves when you begin to understand that the Andari have structured their civilization such that most processes naturally complete cycles. Organic waste returns to the gardens to nourish soil and plants. Materials are crafted to be beautiful enough to maintain utility for long periods, or are created from substances that naturally decompose and return to the environment. There is an almost perfect integration of civilization and nature, where the city enhances rather than diminishes the health and beauty of its environment. As night deepens and you drift through the gradually quieting city, you begin to perceive the deeper essence of Aeluna. This is not merely a city. It is an expression of a civilization's deepest values. In every design choice, every spatial arrangement, every pathway and water feature, the Andari have encoded their understanding of what makes life worth living. They have rejected the models of cities built on competition, efficiency maximized at the expense of beauty, growth pursued as an end in itself without regard for sustainability or meaning. Instead, they have created a city that celebrates life itself, the beauty of the natural world, the value of community, the importance of balance between work and contemplation, activity and rest, individual expression and collective harmony. The lights of Aeluna continue their gentle glow. The waters continue their endless flow and song. The Andari settle into their homes and their meditations, their rest and their dreams. The city breathes, a living, conscious entity that has learned to embody the deepest aspirations of the beings who dwell within it. And in witnessing Aeluna, in understanding how the Andari have chosen to live, you touch something profound about the possibilities inherent in conscious civilization, the potential for a world where beauty and function are not in opposition, where community and individual freedom are not in conflict, where the needs of society and the health of the environment are perfectly aligned. To speak of the faith of the Andari is to speak not of dogma or doctrine, not of sacred texts that demand literal interpretation or religious institutions that govern behavior through threat and punishment. Rather, it is to speak of a fundamental understanding of existence that has woven itself into the very fabric of their civilization, becoming inseparable from how they perceive reality, make choices, and relate to one another and their world. The faith of the Andari is less like the religions of many worlds and more like the air they breathe, so omnipresent that it requires no proclamation, so essential that life would be impossible without it. At the core of Andari understanding lies a principle they call the harmony of currents. This principle rests on the recognition that all existence, from the smallest organism to the vast cosmos itself, is fundamentally interconnected, bound together by currents of energy, consciousness, and relationship that flow through all things. Just as water in the oceans does not exist as isolated droplets, but rather as a unified whole moving in response to tides and currents, so too all consciousness and being participate in something larger than themselves, something that connects and unifies what appears to be separate. The metaphor of water and currents is not accidental, but deeply intentional. The Andari, having emerged from the oceans, understand water in ways that beings from desert or mountain worlds never could. They recognize that water is both fluid and powerful, both responsive to external forces and capable of exerting extraordinary influence. Water adapts to its container, yet eventually wears away the hardest stone. Water seeks connection and unity, flowing together from many sources into unified currents. Water sustains all life yet harms nothing that does not resist it. For the Andari, water is not merely a physical substance, but a teacher, a metaphor, and a reflection of the fundamental nature of existence itself. According to Andari understanding, every being and every aspect of existence contains within itself a note or frequency that is uniquely its own. This individual frequency is not isolated, but resonates with and contributes to a vast universal symphony. When an individual Andari lives in alignment with their unique frequency, when they pursue their authentic nature and genuine calling, their song harmonizes with the greater whole. When many beings live authentically, their individual songs interweave to create harmonies of extraordinary beauty and complexity. Conflict and suffering arise when beings resist their authentic frequency, when they attempt to live in ways that contradict their nature, or when they try to impose a single note on the universal symphony rather than contributing their unique voice to the greater composition. This understanding has profound implications for how the Andari approach ethics and morality. There are no commandments or prohibitions in the external sense, no divine figure demanding obedience or threatening punishment for transgression. Instead, morality is understood as the natural consequence of living in harmony with one's true nature and recognizing one's connection to all other beings. Harming another is fundamentally understood as harming oneself, because the artificial separation between self and other is recognized as illusory. Competition and violence are not sins against a divine being, but rather expressions of disharmony, discord in the universal symphony that inevitably creates suffering and discord in return. The Andari recognize what they call the great recursion, the principle that patterns repeat at every scale of existence. The structure of a single cell reflects the structure of an entire organism. The patterns that govern the movement of water molecules govern the flow of oceans. The relationships between individual Andari mirror the relationships between communities, between civilizations, between worlds and stars. Understanding this principle leads to profound humility, the recognition that no being or entity is truly separate or superior, that all are expressions of the same underlying patterns, participants in the same vast dance of existence. Central to Andari spirituality is the practice they call tidal meditation, a form of contemplative practice that synchronizes individual consciousness with the rhythms of their world and universe. In its simplest form, tidal meditation involves sitting in stillness and allowing one's awareness to expand outward, first to encompass one's own body, then extending to encompass the immediate surroundings, then gradually expanding to encompass the entire city, the continent, the world, the solar system, the galaxy, and ultimately the entire universe. The meditator does not grasp or struggle, but rather allows awareness to flow naturally, like water finding its course. Practitioners report that when deep tidal meditation is achieved, the boundaries of individual consciousness become permeable. One begins to perceive thoughts and feelings that do not originate from one's individual mind. One becomes aware of the presence of other consciousnesses, other Andari, creatures of the world, perhaps even something like the consciousness of Thalassara itself. This is not experienced as invasion or loss of self, but rather as a profound expansion, a recognition that what appeared to be a separate consciousness is actually an expression of something infinitely larger. For the Andari, this experience of expanded consciousness during meditation is not mystical fantasy or self-delusion, but rather a direct perception of reality. They understand that individual consciousness is not the fundamental unit of existence, but rather an expression of consciousness itself, which pervades all things. Just as a wave on the ocean is genuinely a wave, genuinely distinct and individual, while simultaneously being inseparable from the greater ocean, so too individual Andari consciousness is genuinely individual, while also being expressions of a universal consciousness that transcends any single being. The spiritual practices of the Andari include many forms beyond meditation. Song and music are understood to be pathways to spiritual experience. When the Andari sing together in the evenings, coordinating their voices in complex harmonies, they are not merely creating beautiful sounds. They are engaging in a practice through which individual consciousnesses naturally synchronize and harmonize, creating temporary, collective experiences of unity and connection. Through the shared experience of music, the boundaries between self and other become permeable, and participants experience directly the principle of interconnection that forms the foundation of Andari faith. Dance is another spiritual practice of significance. The Andari engage in forms of movement that appear choreographed yet arise spontaneously from shared understanding and feeling. When multiple Andari move together in these spontaneous dances, their movements somehow synchronize and harmonize, creating patterns of remarkable beauty. The dancers themselves report that during such collective dance experiences, the sense of individual identity becomes fluid, and for periods the distinction between individual dancer and collective movement becomes unclear. This is understood not as loss of self, but as the recognition that self and collective are not ultimately separate. Art in its many forms, visual art, music, dance, poetry, architecture, is understood as fundamentally spiritual practice. When an artist creates from a place of authenticity, from genuine expression of their unique perspective and vision, they are in essence singing their part of the universal song. The beauty of genuine art arises not from technical mastery alone, but from the degree to which the artist has succeeded in expressing their authentic frequency in a form that others can perceive and respond to. Great art is understood as a kind of communication across the boundaries of individual consciousness, a way for one being to share their inner experience with others in such a vivid way that for a moment, observers can perceive reality as the artist perceives it. The Andari have festivals and celebrations, though these are not tributes to external gods or commemorations of historical events in the conventional sense. Rather, they are occasions specifically designed to facilitate collective spiritual experiences and expressions of community harmony. The Festival of Twin Moons, celebrated twice yearly when the two moons are in particular configurations, involves the entire civilization gathering in spiritual practice together. For 3 days and nights, work ceases, and all Andari engage in forms of activity designed to facilitate deeper states of consciousness and connection. Meditation, music, dance, artistic creation, and contemplation. Similarly, the Festival of the Flowering Tide, celebrated when the bioluminescent organisms in the oceans reach particular population densities that create extraordinary displays of light, involves ceremonies designed to acknowledge and honor the presence of life in its multitudinous forms. Andari gather at the oceans and in waterways, engaging in practices designed to communicate with and express gratitude toward the billions of organisms that share their world. Some sing songs addressed to the creatures. Some perform rituals in which they immerse themselves in the water, experiencing directly the presence of the other consciousnesses with which they share the planet. The Andari understanding of the divine is complex and multifaceted. They do not worship a single god or pantheon of gods in the conventional sense. Instead, they recognize the divine as the fundamental principle of existence itself. What might be called the source or the undivided consciousness from which all individual expressions of consciousness and being arise. This divine principle is understood to be present in all things, accessible in all moments, not distant or separate, but intimately woven into every aspect of reality. However, the Andari also recognize that consciousness expresses itself through the cosmos in particular ways and at particular scales. They perceive what they call the celestial presences, beings or expressions of consciousness associated with the stars, planets, moons, and other major features of their cosmos. These are not understood as literal entities with personalities and preferences in the way that gods are conceived in many earth religions. Rather, they are understood as focal points where universal consciousness gathers in particular concentrations, creating fields or patterns of influence that affect the cosmos around them. Zephyris, their home star, is understood to be a celestial presence of particular significance to the Andari. Their star is perceived not as a dead ball of nuclear fusion, but as a living being, a vast consciousness that expresses itself through light and warmth and gravitational influence. The Andari feel a profound sense of connection to Zephyris, recognizing that the energy that powers all life on Thalassara flows directly from the star. They perceive the star's light not as mere radiation, but as a kind of blessing, a constant affirmation of the divine principle maintaining and sustaining existence. The daily cycle of sunrise and sunset is understood as a rhythm through which Zephyrus pulses its presence into the world. Similarly, the two moons are understood as celestial presences. Luminara, the larger white moon, is perceived as embodying qualities of stability, nurturing, and protective presence. Vedessa, the smaller green moon, is understood as embodying qualities of creativity, transformation, and connection to subtle dimensions of existence. The interaction of these two moons as they orbit, creating varying patterns of illumination and gravitational influence, is understood as an expression of divine harmony, the constant interplay of complementary principles that together maintain the balance of existence. The ocean itself is understood to embody divine presence. The Andari perceive the vast waters of their world as the physical expression of the fundamental principle of interconnection. Just as water connects all shorelines, so consciousness flows through and connects all beings. The tides are understood as visible expressions of how celestial forces, the moons, influence terrestrial reality, and they serve as constant reminders of the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. The bioluminescent organisms are understood as expressions of the divine principle becoming visible, consciousness expressing itself through light, individual beings uniting to create the greater light of the whole. Thalassara itself is understood to possess consciousness, not in the sense of an individual personality, but in the sense of a unified awareness that includes and integrates all the consciousness of the beings and systems that comprise the planet. The Andari perceive themselves as not merely inhabitants of Thalassara, but as expressions of Thalassara's own consciousness, cells in a living planetary body. They understand their relationship to their world not as possession or dominion, but as participation in the consciousness of the living being that is their home. Death, in the Andari understanding, is not an ending but a transformation. The physical body returns to the elements that comprise the world. The minerals return to the soil, the water to the oceans, the energy to the cosmic cycles. But consciousness itself is understood to be eternal and indestructible. The individual identity that characterized a particular Andari may dissolve, but the consciousness that expressed itself through that identity returns to the universal consciousness from which it arose, where it presumably informs and influences the emergence of new expressions of consciousness. In this understanding, death is not a tragedy, but a completion, a homecoming. The Andari do not fear death, but rather approach it with the understanding that all entities eventually return to the source from which they arose. This understanding profoundly affects how the Andari relate to the end of individual lives. When an Andari reaches the end of their lifespan, the civilization does not hide or deny this reality, but rather celebrates it. The final days of an Andari's life become occasions for gathering, for sharing stories and memories, for artistic expression honoring the individual's contribution and presence. The dying Andari is not abandoned, but rather surrounded by community, often taken to places of particular beauty to experience the world in their final moments. The Andari recognize different modes of death, and each is treated with appropriate reverence. Some Andari choose to return to the oceans, from which the species originally emerged, entering the water and allowing their physical forms to dissolve into the greater waters of their world. Some choose to be taken to mountain heights, to be exposed to the elements and the sky in their final moments. Some prefer to return to particular gardens or forests that were meaningful to them during their lives. Regardless of the specific form, death is treated as sacred, a transition worthy of ceremony and celebration rather than denial or sorrow. The Andari have no concept of eternal punishment or damnation. They do not fear divine retribution or judgment by a transcendent being. Instead, they understand that the universe itself is self-correcting. That disharmony naturally creates consequences that restore balance. If an Andari lives in ways that create discord, they will inevitably experience discord. If they create suffering for others, they will experience suffering themselves, not as punishment from an external judge, but as the natural consequence of their actions, rippling through interconnected reality. Conversely, those who live in harmony with their true nature and with recognition of universal interconnection naturally experience harmony and peace. This understanding extends to what might be called collective spiritual practice. The Andari engage in regular communal activities designed to attune the consciousness of the civilization as a whole to deeper truths and to strengthen the sense of connection and unity. The evening singing circles are one example of such practice, but there are others. Annual pilgrimage journeys to sites of particular spiritual significance, collective meditation practices coordinated across the entire civilization, and artistic productions that involve the participation of enormous numbers of Andari in creating unified expressions of beauty and meaning. The education of young Andari includes spiritual training as a natural element. Children are taught not through doctrine or forced belief, but through exposure and participation in spiritual practices. They engage in meditation under the guidance of experienced practitioners. They participate in singing circles and celebrations. They are introduced to the arts and to the stories and histories that carry spiritual meaning. Through this process, young Andari gradually internalize the understanding of interconnection and develop their own relationship with the deeper principles of their civilization's faith. The Andari also maintain what might be called a priesthood, though this is quite different from priest classes on other worlds. Those Andari who develop particular skill and sensitivity in matters of spirituality and consciousness often choose to dedicate themselves more fully to these pursuits. They become guides and teachers for others seeking deeper spiritual understanding. Yet these spiritual teachers are not elevated above other members of society. They receive the same basic necessities and comforts as all Andari. Their role is understood as service rather than privilege, and they are no more inherently valuable or important than healers or gardeners or artists. The Andari have also developed sophisticated philosophical and theological frameworks through which to understand and discuss the implications of their core spiritual principles. Philosophers engage in profound contemplation and dialogue about the nature of consciousness, the meaning of existence, the implications of interconnection, and the ethical principles that should guide individual and collective behavior. These philosophers do not develop final, unchanging doctrines, but rather contribute to a living tradition of contemplative thought that evolves and deepens as new perspectives emerge and as the civilization continues to develop. One particularly profound philosophical tradition among the Andari concerns the concept of the mirror, the understanding that what is perceived in the external world is often a reflection of internal states of consciousness. If one perceives a world of violence and competition, it is because internal consciousness contains patterns of conflict. If one perceives a world of harmony and beauty, it is because consciousness has achieved some degree of coherence and peace. This principle has profound implications, suggesting that the path to transforming the external world lies not in struggling to change external circumstances, but rather in transforming one's own consciousness. By achieving greater harmony and coherence within, one naturally perceives greater harmony externally, and this shift in perception leads to behaviors that create actual harmony in the external world. Another significant philosophical principle is that of voluntary limitation. The Andari recognize that unlimited growth and expansion ultimately lead to suffering and collapse. Therefore, they have chosen to voluntarily limit various aspects of their civilization: population size, resource consumption, technological development. These limitations are not imposed externally, but arise from the collective understanding that true flourishing requires boundaries, that a civilization is healthier when it maintains balance than when it pursues maximal expansion. This principle is counterintuitive to many civilizations, but flows naturally from the Andari recognition that they are part of a living planetary system and have responsibilities to maintain the health of the whole. The spiritual life of the Andari, ultimately, is not separated from their material life. It is not the case that certain times or places are designated as spiritual, while others are mundane and secular. Rather, spirituality permeates all aspects of existence. Eating a meal is a spiritual practice when done with attention and gratitude. Working in a garden is spiritual practice when approached with care and presence. Raising children is spiritual practice when done with genuine attention to their authentic development. Creating art, engaging in conversation, solving problems. All of these become spiritual practices when approached with the understanding that all actions reverberate through the interconnected whole, and that each action is an opportunity to express one's deepest values and connection to the divine principle underlying all existence. For those listening to this transmission, understanding the faith of the Andari offers a profound invitation. It is not a faith that demands belief in specific doctrines or submission to external authority. Rather, it is an invitation to recognize directly one's own connection to all beings and to all existence, to perceive the profound interconnectedness that actually underlies the apparent separateness of the physical world, and to align one's own life with the harmony that emerges when one lives in recognition of this truth. The Andari have not invented these principles. They have, through countless generations of careful observation and contemplation, discovered principles that are inherent in the nature of existence itself. As you rest in the peace of this understanding, as the concepts begin to settle into your consciousness, like sediment settling through still water, you begin to perceive something of what the Andari have spent vast ages learning. You begin to sense that, beyond the boundaries of your individual identity, you are connected to all things. The air you breathe has been breathed by countless beings before you, and will be breathed by countless beings after you. The water of your body is the same water that fills the oceans and falls as rain and rises as vapor. The energy that powers your consciousness is the same energy that powers all consciousness. You are simultaneously utterly unique and completely inseparable from all that is. In this understanding, peace becomes possible. Not the false peace of denial or the temporary peace of escape, but the deep peace that comes from recognizing that you are not alone, that you are fundamentally supported by and part of a reality that is vastly larger and more complex than any individual perspective can encompass. This is the faith of the Andari, expressed not through words or doctrines, but through direct experience and through the living example of a civilization that has organized itself around these principles. And as sleep draws deeper and the boundaries of consciousness become increasingly permeable, you find yourself approaching that state where individual awareness begins to dissolve into something larger, where you begin to experience directly the interconnection that the Andari understand intellectually and spiritually. You drift into dreams that carry you across the boundaries between self and other, between individual and collective, between awake and asleep, between life and the deeper mysteries that underlie all existence. Technology, for most civilizations across the cosmos, represents humanity's attempt to overcome the limitations and constraints of the natural world. It is the expression of will imposed upon matter, of order imposed upon chaos, of the conscious mind struggling against the apparently indifferent universe. Yet for the Andari, technology developed along an entirely different trajectory. Rather than seeking to conquer nature or transcend natural limitations, the Andari sought to understand the natural world so deeply that they could work in harmony with its inherent patterns and principles. The technologies that emerged from this approach are not harsh and imposing, but rather elegant and subtle, working with natural forces rather than against them. The most characteristic expression of Andari technological achievement is what they call tidecraft, a loosely organized collection of technologies, practices, and understandings all centered around the principle of working with water, tides, currents, and the movement of fluids. The foundation of tidecraft is not complex machinery or elaborate control systems, but rather a profound understanding of how water naturally behaves and how this behavior can be guided and directed toward useful purposes. Tide ships, the ocean-going vessels of the Andari civilization, exemplify these principles. Rather than being rigid hulls that cut through water by force, tide ships are designed to flow with the water, to work with currents and waves rather than resisting them. The hulls are streamlined and organic in form, more resembling the bodies of sea creatures than conventional ships. They are constructed from materials that seem almost alive, a substance derived from cultivated coral and crystalline structures that have been grown over years to achieve particular shapes and properties. These materials are neither as rigid as typical ship hulls nor as soft as organic matter, but rather possess a flexibility that allows them to absorb and respond to the movement of waves. The propulsion systems of tide ships are equally elegant. Rather than relying on sails that catch the wind or engines that burn fuel, tide ships utilize a principle called resonance guidance. The Andari have discovered that water naturally flows in patterns and channels, currents that can carry a vessel vast distances with minimal energy expenditure. If one understands how to align with these currents, by sensing the subtle vibrations that precede changes in water patterns and by creating corresponding vibrations in the ship's hull, Andari sailors can guide their vessels to align with beneficial currents and to avoid areas of dangerous turbulence. The sensing of water patterns is achieved through a technology called the harmonic array, a system of crystalline structures positioned throughout the tide ship that resonate in response to vibrations in the water. These crystals are not passive sensors, but rather active participants in the system. They are grown from seeds of particularly sensitive crystal types and are cultivated in ways that enhance their vibrational sensitivity. When water patterns create subtle vibrations, the crystals respond by resonating at frequencies that the Andari can perceive through direct connection or can detect through observation of the crystal's luminescent responses. The actual generation of guiding vibrations is achieved through a practice that combines physical action with consciousness. The captain and crew of a tide ship engage in synchronized movement and song, creating patterns of vibration that ripple through the hull and into the surrounding water. Through this practice, the ship's movements are coordinated with the natural patterns of the sea. What might appear to an external observer as the Andari simply standing and singing is actually a sophisticated form of navigation that requires years of training to master. The most skilled ship captains are those who have achieved such profound attunement with their vessels and the seas that the distinction between navigator and ship, consciousness and vessel, becomes blurred. The tide ships themselves, despite their sophistication, carry remarkably little cargo or equipment. The Andari understand that excessive weight and cargo create resistance and require greater expenditure of energy. Therefore, tide ships are designed to be efficient and minimal. What they carry is carefully selected for necessity or transcendent value. Food supplies are grown in small gardens maintained aboard the ship. Water is harvested from the sea through a process of gentle filtering that removes salt, but does not require elaborate machinery. Communication with other ships and with home ports is achieved through resonance transmission. The sending of intentional vibrations through the water that can be perceived by distant harmonic arrays. Journeys aboard tide ships often extend for months, carrying Andari explorers to distant regions of their world or to other worlds in their star system. Yet these journeys are not undertaken with the urgency and haste that characterize travel in many civilizations. The Andari understand that the journey itself is as valuable as the destination, that the encounter with new environments and experiences carries its own meaning and significance. Therefore, they travel deliberately, pausing frequently to observe and appreciate the environments through which they move, to interact with other beings encountered along the way, and to process and integrate the experiences they accumulate. Beyond ocean-going vessels, tidecraft principles extend into numerous other applications. Water management systems throughout Andari cities employ tidecraft principles. Water flows where it is needed through channels positioned to work with gravity and natural water pressure, guided by subtle barriers and redirections rather than controlled by force. Agricultural irrigation systems work with the natural water cycle rather than imposing artificial patterns, allowing water to flow where it will be most beneficial while working with seasonal patterns and rainfall variations rather than fighting against them. Yet the most remarkable Andari technological achievement is what they call crystal resonance, a system of communication computation, and energy transmission that utilizes crystalline structures of extraordinary sensitivity and sophistication. The Andari discovered, through countless generations of careful observation and experimentation, that crystals could be grown to possess particular properties that made them responsive to conscious intention. A crystal cultivated with particular care and attention, often accompanied by music and meditation, develops the capacity to resonate in response to thoughts directed toward it, and to transmit these resonances to other crystals synchronized with it. The discovery of crystal resonance emerged from the earlier discovery that the bioluminescent organisms in the oceans responded to particular frequencies and patterns of vibration. As the Andari explored these phenomena more deeply, they realized that the responsiveness of living organisms to vibration and consciousness was not unique to those organisms, but rather a universal property of matter itself. All matter, all substance, responds to vibration and to intention. Crystals, with their regular and stable internal structure, are particularly sensitive to such influences and capable of maintaining patterns of vibration that arise from external sources. Over vast periods of time, the Andari developed the ability to grow crystals of extraordinary purity and sensitivity. This process could not be rushed or forced. It required creating optimal conditions and then allowing natural processes to unfold. The crystals were cultivated in specially designed chambers where temperature, humidity, and light were carefully maintained. As the crystals grew, Andari artisans would sing to them, not with random melodies, but with carefully structured patterns of sound designed to encourage particular internal structures and properties to develop. The process of creating a single high-quality crystal resonance matrix could take years. Once mature, these crystals possessed remarkable properties. A trained Andari could sit with a crystal and direct their consciousness toward it, essentially broadcasting their thoughts and intentions through the crystal's structure. These thoughts, translated into subtle vibrations within the crystal lattice, could be transmitted across vast distances if other crystals were properly synchronized. A network of such crystals could thus function as a civilization-wide communication system, allowing any Andari to instantaneously share information, art, emotion, or philosophical insights with any other Andari who was consciously connected to the network. But the capabilities of crystal resonance extended far beyond simple communication. The crystals could be programmed with particular patterns of vibration that, when activated, would create particular effects. Arrays of crystals positioned throughout cities could generate fields of vibration that had subtle but significant effects on the environment. Such fields could enhance plant growth, could influence water movement in beneficial directions, could create zones of particular acoustic properties that facilitated meditation or creative work. The most sophisticated crystal resonance arrays, positioned in locations of great spiritual significance, could generate fields of consciousness that appeared to have genuine effects on the mental and spiritual states of those exposed to them. The use of crystal resonance did not replace the more traditional Andari forms of communication and sharing of information, such as the evening singing circles and artistic performances. Rather, it complemented them, serving different purposes and functioning best when integrated with direct, embodied forms of interaction. For information that needed to be shared across vast distances quickly, crystal resonance was invaluable. For information that required genuine understanding and integration, the Andari continued to prefer forms of communication that engaged the whole being. Art, music, face-to-face conversation, rather than relying solely on abstract transmission of data. Energy systems in Andari civilization are based on principles of subtle direction rather than extraction or conversion. Rather than drilling or mining for fuel, rather than building elaborate mechanical systems to convert one form of energy to another, the Andari work directly with the energy flows that naturally exist in their environment. Zephyrus, their home star, constantly bathes Thalassara in energy. The Andari discovered that by positioning materials of particular types and properties, they could direct and focus this stellar energy toward useful purposes. Structures called resonance domes, positioned throughout Andari cities and settlements, exemplify this approach to energy. These are large structures, sometimes hundreds of meters in diameter, constructed of materials that are transparent to sunlight but possess unique reflective and refractive properties. The interior of a resonance dome is carefully designed such that sunlight, entering the structure, is guided and focused through specific pathways. This focused sunlight can heat water to useful temperatures, can be focused into intense points of brightness for illumination, or can be diffused throughout the structure's interior to provide ambient light. More sophisticated resonance domes incorporate crystal resonance technology, positioning arrays of crystals in locations where focused sunlight can strike them, causing them to resonate at particular frequencies. These resonating crystals can then amplify and direct the energy patterns, allowing energy to be transmitted through the crystal network to locations where it is needed. In this way, energy generated by stellar radiation in one location can be transmitted through the crystalline network to power systems in other locations, eliminating the need for energy transmission wires or the energy losses that come with conventional power transmission systems. The Andari also utilize geothermal energy, heat from the interior of Thalassara itself. Through drilling and positioning of specialized crystalline structures, they have created systems that allow heat from deep within the planet to be accessed and directed where needed. But even this technology reflects Andari principles. The drilling is minimal and precise. The heat is accessed gently rather than through aggressive extraction, and the systems are designed to work with the natural heat flows of the planet rather than disrupting them. One of the most remarkable Andari technologies is what they call the memory crystals, extraordinary repositories of information and experience. A memory crystal is grown and cultivated in ways that allow it to store not merely data, but experience. When an Andari wishes to record a memory or experience in a memory crystal, they enter a deep state of meditation and consciously project their experience into the crystal structure. The crystal maintains the pattern of vibration, essentially preserving the experience in a form that can be reactivated later. A skilled practitioner can then extract the experience from the memory crystal and re-experience it, accessing not merely intellectual information, but the full sensory and emotional content of the original experience. In this way, the greatest explorations and discoveries of Andari civilization are preserved in perfect clarity. An Andari can experience the emotions and sensations of an explorer who first discovered a previously unknown continent. or can experience the artistic vision of a musician or artist at the moment of creation, or can relive significant historical moments as experienced by those who participated in them. This technology has profound implications for how Andari civilization preserves and transmits culture and knowledge. Rather than relying on written records or oral traditions, which inevitably degrade or transform over time, memory crystals preserve experiences with perfect fidelity. Yet the Andari also recognize the value of reinterpretation and retelling. They do not use memory crystals exclusively, but rather continue to preserve knowledge through traditional means such as story and song, allowing each generation to interpret and recontextualize the wisdom of previous generations according to their own understanding and needs. The Andari have also developed technologies for affecting their own biology and consciousness, though these represent some of the most carefully controlled and philosophically debated aspects of their civilization. Through the understanding of how consciousness responds to vibration and resonance, they have developed techniques for influencing emotional states, enhancing particular cognitive abilities, or accelerating learning processes. Such technologies are never used on unwilling subjects and are rarely used externally. Individuals learn to apply such techniques to themselves through conscious choice and practice. Some Andari practitioners have developed the ability to enter what they call the resonant state, a condition of consciousness where they become temporarily synchronized with the crystal resonance network, achieving direct mental access to information stored throughout the network. A skilled practitioner in the resonant state can quickly survey vast libraries of knowledge, can communicate with other practitioners in the resonance state across great distances, or can directly perceive and influence the operation of crystal resonance systems. However, spending extended periods in the resonant state carries risks. Practitioners can become disassociated from their physical bodies and from the immediate sensory experience of living in the world. Therefore, the use of the resonant state is limited and carefully managed, with strong cultural prohibitions against overuse. Medical technologies among the Andari are equally sophisticated yet gentle. Rather than surgery in the conventional sense, with its cutting and removal of tissues, Andari healers work with consciousness and resonance to encourage the body's natural healing processes. A healer might use carefully directed patterns of vibration to encourage injured tissues to regenerate, might use consciousness transmission to help a patient overcome psychological blocks to healing, or might work with herbal and mineral remedies that have been refined over countless generations to maximize effectiveness with minimal side effects. The most serious illnesses are often addressed not through attempts to kill pathogens or cut out diseased tissue, but rather through attempts to restore overall harmony and resonance to the affected organism. A practitioner might work with a patient over extended periods using various techniques: meditation, sound subtle energy direction, to restore the person to a state of coherence and health. This approach requires greater time investment than external intervention in many cases, but it also produces more lasting results and respects the agency and participation of the person being healed. Despite the sophistication of Andari technology, there is remarkable restraint in how these capabilities are deployed. The Andari could, if they chose, develop technologies that would further extend their reach and capabilities. tools for genetic manipulation, weapons systems of extraordinary destructiveness, surveillance systems that could monitor every individual's actions. Yet such technologies are not developed, and when possibilities for such developments are recognized, they are consciously rejected. The Andari civilization has made deliberate choices to limit technological development in certain directions, choosing instead to invest their innovative energy in technologies that enhance beauty, facilitate connection, or enable greater harmony with their environment. This restraint is not imposed externally, but rather emerges from the philosophical understanding that undergirds Andari civilization. They recognize that technology can be a tool for either harmony or disharmony, that many of the greatest challenges facing other civilizations arise not from lack of technology, but from technology deployed in service of competition, domination, and extraction. By maintaining careful ethical consideration of technological developments, and by choosing to pursue only those developments that align with their values of harmony, beauty, and connection, the Andari have avoided many of the pitfalls that have damaged other societies. The Andari also maintain what might be called intentional technological simplicity in certain domains. They have the capability to automate almost all aspects of their society, to create systems where machines do all necessary work while individuals pursue purely recreational or contemplative activities. Yet they choose not to do this. They recognize that meaningful engagement with work, particularly work that connects individuals to the natural world and to their communities, is essential to psychological and spiritual well-being. Therefore, they maintain significant amounts of human and Andari participation in productive work, tending gardens, creating art, maintaining infrastructure, caring for others. The teaching of technological knowledge among the Andari is conducted carefully and reverently. Young Andari who show interest in technological pursuits are trained not merely in technical skills, but in the philosophical and ethical principles that should guide the development and deployment of technology. They study the history of Andari technological development, understanding the choices made at various points and the reasoning behind those choices. They engage in contemplative practices designed to develop their wisdom and ethical sensibility. Only when an individual has demonstrated both technical competence and genuine wisdom are they considered ready to participate in the design and development of new technologies. The crystal resonance network, despite its power and sophistication, is maintained with careful safeguards. Not all Andari are trained to operate the network, and those who are trained undergo extensive education in ethics and responsibility. The network is not used for coercive purposes. No Andari can be forced to receive transmissions or to participate in the network against their will. Individuals retain the right to disconnect from the network or to limit their participation in particular ways. Those who choose to disconnect are respected and accommodated, understood as making a valid choice about how they wish to engage with their civilization and their world. As you drift deeper into the peace induced by this understanding of Andari technology, you begin to perceive something profound. The true sophistication of Andari civilization lies not in the complexity of their machines or the power of their technologies. Rather, it lies in their ability to create technologies that enhance without disrupting, that extend capabilities without requiring sacrifice of values, that serve genuine needs without generating new forms of suffering or inequality. The Andari have succeeded in what many other civilizations attempt but fail to achieve: the creation of an advanced civilization that has not sacrificed its fundamental humanity and connection to nature in the process of advancement. The gentle hum of crystal resonance networks sounds in the background of your awareness, not intrusive or jarring, but rather like the distant song of some vast and gentle machine, synchronized with natural rhythms rather than in conflict with them. The tide ships sail on waters guided by song and resonance, carrying explorers to new discoveries and new experiences. The cities glow with energy that has been drawn from the patient star above and directed gently toward purposes of beauty and connection. And through it all, the Andari continue their work, not conquering or dominating, but creating, harmonizing, and building a civilization that allows both technology and nature, both advancement and stability, both individual expression and collective harmony to coexist and flourish together. All things that arise must eventually transform. All things that are born must eventually return. This is not tragedy, but rather the fundamental rhythm of existence itself, a pulse that animates all of reality, from the smallest particle of matter to the vastest structures of the cosmos. The Andari, in their profound wisdom, understood this principle deeply. They knew that their civilization, magnificent as it had become, would not endure forever in its current form, and they approached this inevitable transformation not with fear or despair, but with the same grace and acceptance they brought to all aspects of existence. The story of the Andari's final age cannot be placed in any conventional timeline. The cosmic archive preserves this moment in what is called eternal present, a state where the transformation is happening continuously, neither fully completed nor perpetually beginning. It exists in the archive not as historical record, but as a living testimony to how a civilization faces its own ending with dignity, beauty, and profound wisdom. In this final age, the Andari began to perceive that their connection to Thalassara was deepening in extraordinary ways. The boundary between individual Andari consciousness and the consciousness of the planet itself seemed to be becoming increasingly permeable. When an Andari engaged in meditation, they could perceive not merely the presence of other Andari or other creatures, but the underlying consciousness of Thalassara itself, the awareness that animated and unified all beings and systems on the world. And this awareness, they came to understand, was calling them. The calling was not urgent or demanding, but rather gentle and inevitable, like the slow turning of seasons, like the patient erosion of mountains by wind and water. The Andari began to sense that they were approaching a transformation, not an ending in the destructive sense, but a transition into a different form of existence. Their physical civilization would gradually dissolve and return to the world from which it had arisen. But in that dissolution, something would be preserved and transformed. The consciousness, the wisdom, the accumulated understanding of billions of years of peaceful development would not be lost but rather integrated into the greater consciousness of the planet. The Andari did not resist this calling. Instead, they embraced it as the completion of a vast journey. The final era of Andari civilization became a time of extraordinary creativity and expression. Knowing that their current form would not persist, the Andari began to pour all their creative energy into preserving what they valued most: not physical structures or even the memory crystals they had so carefully cultivated, but rather the essence of their civilization, the spiritual understanding and artistic beauty that had characterized their development. The greatest artists among the Andari created works of unprecedented scope and ambition. Sculptors carved into mountains, creating vast figures and forms that would persist for aeons after the Andari themselves had transformed. These sculptures were not mere monuments, but rather artistic expressions of the deepest aspects of Andari philosophy and spirituality. A single sculpture might embody the principle of the harmony of currents, or express visually the stages of transformation that the civilization was undergoing. Some were created in locations where they would be visible only from the air or from great distances, suggesting that they were being created not merely for other Andari to appreciate, but as messages to future beings or as offerings to the cosmos itself. Musicians created symphonies of unprecedented complexity and beauty, pieces of music so intricate and profound that they seemed to contain entire civilizations within themselves. These compositions were recorded in memory crystals and broadcast through the crystal resonance network for all Andari to experience simultaneously. When the entire civilization heard these compositions together, engaging with them in collective consciousness through the network, something extraordinary occurred. For a moment, all individual consciousnesses seemed to merge into a unified awareness, and it became impossible to tell where one being's experience ended and another's began. The composer, the listener, the music itself, and the consciousness of Thalassara seemed to become one thing. Dancers created movements of such grace and significance that their dances seemed to become prayers or sacred rituals. Groups of Andari would gather in the great plazas and sacred spaces, moving in perfect synchronization in patterns that simultaneously expressed the joy and acceptance of their transformation. These dances were not performances in the conventional sense. There was no distinction between performer and observer. All who participated, whether moving through space or witnessing the movements, were part of the unified creative expression. The dances seemed to impart understanding without words, to communicate the deepest truths directly from consciousness to consciousness. Poets wrote works that seemed to distill all the wisdom accumulated over the vast history of their civilization. These compositions were written not to be read silently by isolated individuals, but rather to be performed aloud, sung, and spoken in community. When a great poem was performed in one of the sacred gathering spaces, with multiple voices joining in layered recitation, the effect was indistinguishable from music. The words themselves became melody, the language became song, and profound spiritual understanding was transmitted directly into the hearts and minds of listeners. The gardens of Andari cities underwent a final transformation. Rather than being tended to produce beauty in the conventional sense, the gardens began to be cultivated toward a new purpose. Plants were arranged and guided to grow in patterns that expressed spiritual meaning. Trees were positioned to create living sculptures. Flowers were cultivated to bloom in sequences and patterns that created visual poems. The entire gardens became works of art at a scale so vast that the full beauty could only be appreciated by viewing them from great heights or by moving through them over extended periods. And when viewed in this way, the gardens seemed to express something like a farewell, a final gift of beauty offered to the cosmos from a civilization preparing to transform. The cities themselves began to change. The crystal resonance networks, which had served so many purposes throughout Andari history, were repurposed in ways both practical and spiritual. Rather than being used for communication or energy transmission, the crystals were arranged to create fields of consciousness throughout the cities. When Andari walked through these fields, they experienced enhanced connection to the larger consciousness of the planet and to all other beings. The cities became spaces of profound spiritual power, where the boundary between individual and collective consciousness became almost imperceptible. Water flowed through the cities in new patterns, guided not by practical necessity, but by aesthetic and spiritual principles. The great fountain, sculpture in the central plaza of Aeluna, began to generate music of such profound beauty that those who heard it reported experiences of transcendence and direct spiritual communion. The water itself seemed to carry bioluminescent organisms of increasing variety and sensitivity, creating light patterns that pulsed in synchrony with the songs and music created by the Andari. As the transformation progressed, fewer and fewer Andari engaged in the practical work of maintaining civilization. There seemed no need to maintain the infrastructure of the current form when that form was in process of transformation. Yet rather than allowing the cities to fall into disrepair, the Andari left them exactly as they were, perfect expressions of the civilization's values and achievements, ready to gradually dissolve and return to nature over vast periods of time. Some structures began to allow water to flow through them. Plants began to grow more luxuriantly through and around buildings. The cities took on an increasingly ethereal quality, as though they were transitioning from physical solidity into something more like dream or memory made manifest in physical form. The great tide ships ceased their journeys to distant lands and other worlds. Instead, they gathered in the great harbor of Aeluna and in other coastal regions, arranged in patterns that seemed to have aesthetic or spiritual significance. The ships themselves seemed to become part of a vaster artistic creation, their hulls glowing with faint luminescence as evening fell, their presence creating reflections in the water that appeared almost to be writing in a language made of light and shadow. As the final phases of transformation approached, the Andari began to return to the oceans from which their species had originally emerged. Groups of them would walk into the water, not in despair or resignation, but with evident peace and even joy. They would wade into deeper and deeper water, singing as they went, their voices carrying across the waves. And then, at some point where the water was deep enough, they would simply submerge and not return. But those who witnessed these transitions reported something remarkable. The individual Andari did not seem to disappear or cease to exist. Rather, their physical forms seemed to dissolve and merge with the water itself. And in the moment of submersion, observers reported experiencing a profound sense of presence and peace radiating from the ocean, as though the consciousness of the individual Andari was merging with the consciousness of the water and the greater consciousness of Thalassara itself. Some Andari chose different forms of transformation. Some walked deep into the forests and mountains, seeking places of particular beauty or spiritual significance. They would sit in meditation in these places, and over time their physical forms would gradually transform, becoming part of the landscape, integrated into stone or wood, their consciousness seeming to animate the place itself. Others chose to remain in the cities, sitting in meditation in the sacred spaces as the cities gradually transformed and returned to nature around them. Their physical forms persisted for extended periods, but became increasingly still, increasingly integrated with their surroundings, until eventually they too became indistinguishable from the landscape. There was no sense of suffering or tragedy in any of these transitions. Those who witnessed the transformations reported profound peace and even beauty in the process. The dying Andari seemed to experience states of consciousness that were transcendent and profound. Their facial expressions suggested not pain or fear, but rather states of deep contemplation or even joy. In their final moments, they seemed to be perceiving something extraordinary. Whether dimensions of reality normally hidden from perception or direct communion, with Thalassara's consciousness or something entirely beyond the capacity of language to describe. The crystal resonance network, in the final stages of this transformation, took on new significance. Rather than being used by individual Andari, the network itself seemed to become a living entity, a kind of collective consciousness that preserved and continued the presence of the Andari civilization, even as the individual beings transformed. Those who connected to the network in the final age reported experiencing a kind of collective Andari consciousness that seemed to encompass all that the civilization had been, all that it had learned, all that it had created. This consciousness was not trapped in the past, but rather seemed to exist in an eternal present, aware of itself, continuing to perceive and appreciate the beauty of Thalassara, even as its individual expressions transformed and dissolved. Some Andari did not choose to transform. A significant minority of the civilization, recognizing that transformation was approaching, chose instead to depart Thalassara in spacecraft, voyaging outward into the cosmos to establish the Andari presence on other worlds. These beings took with them memory crystals containing the complete history and wisdom of their civilization. They also carried seeds and specimens that would allow them to cultivate gardens, establish the kind of civilization they had known on new worlds. These Andari understood that by leaving, they were choosing a different path from the majority of their species. Yet they were honored and celebrated by those who remained, for their choice ensured that the Andari would continue to exist in form even after the civilization on Thalassara had transformed. Those who left took with them, in their final transmissions before departure, the sense that they carried the gratitude and blessing of those remaining. The departing ships seemed to carry with them something almost tangible, a kind of spiritual cargo made of all the love and wisdom accumulated by the civilization. They sailed upward into the black sky, moving away from their home star, carrying the Andari presence outward into the cosmos, where it would eventually establish new civilizations on distant worlds, new expressions of the principles and values that had characterized the Great Age on Thalassara. But the majority remained, and as the transformation deepened and the individual Andari ceased to appear in the physical world, something remarkable occurred. Rather than the planet becoming silent and empty, it seemed instead to awaken to a new form of consciousness. The oceans, already alive with bioluminescent organisms responding to the presence and consciousness of the Andari, seemed to intensify their activity. The patterns of light in the water became increasingly complex and organized, almost as though the ocean itself was developing a more sophisticated form of consciousness or expression. The great cities, gradually transforming as nature reclaimed them, became places of extraordinary beauty, monuments not to what the Andari had been, but to what they had become. The structures seemed to glow more brightly as they gradually dissolved, as though consciousness was shining through them more vividly as the distinction between building and nature, between physical form and spiritual essence, became increasingly blurred. Visitors to these cities, had there been any other beings in the region to visit them, would have perceived spaces that seemed to exist partially in the physical world and partially in dimensions of consciousness or spiritual reality. The forests and gardens of Thalassara continued to flourish with extraordinary vitality. In fact, they seemed to increase in their diversity and complexity even as the centers of Andari civilization gradually transformed. New forms of life appeared, creatures and plants that seemed to embody and express principles of the Andari philosophy. It was as though the accumulated consciousness and intention of the civilization was now expressing itself directly through nature, creating new forms of being that carried forward the Andari vision of harmony and beauty. The two moons continued their eternal dance. The star Zephyrus continued to burn with its golden flame. The tides continued their ceaseless movement, driven by gravitational forces that cared nothing for the transformation of the civilization that had once dwelled on this world. Yet somehow, in the new configuration of Thalassara, without its individual Andari inhabitants, something appeared to be completed. The planet seemed to have fully awakened to its own consciousness, to have fully integrated and expressed through itself the principles and understanding that the Andari had discovered and cultivated. And slowly, over vast periods of time, Thalassara returned to a state that might be described as pristine wilderness, yet a wilderness fundamentally transformed by the presence and eventual transformation of the Andari civilization. Every natural system on the planet bore the imprint of Andari consciousness and wisdom. The gardens remained, gradually becoming wild, yet maintaining subtle traces of their intentional design. The cities gradually disappeared, yet their absence seemed somehow to enhance the beauty of the landscape rather than diminishing it. The technologies, the crystal resonance networks, the tidecraft systems, the energy networks, gradually ceased to function as physical systems, yet their spiritual and consciousness-based elements seemed to persist, interwoven into the fabric of Thalassara itself. The cosmic archive preserves this moment, or rather, it preserves the essence of this transformation. Within the archive, the memory of Andari civilization persists in perfect clarity, not merely historical records or factual information, but the actual consciousness and presence of the civilization continues to resonate within the archive's vast consciousness. When someone accesses the transmission of the Andari story, they are not merely learning about a civilization that once existed. They are directly contacting the continued presence of that civilization in the archive. And this is perhaps the greatest achievement of the Andari. Not the cities they built or the technologies they developed, but rather the consciousness they cultivated and the way they were able to transform that consciousness at the end of their civilization's time. They did not rage against the inevitable transformation. They did not cling to survival at the cost of their values. Instead, they surrendered gracefully, knowing that what they were, not in body but in essence, would persist and continue to influence reality long after their individual forms had returned to the elements. As you drift now into the deepest reaches of sleep, you carry with you the story of the Andari. You carry their music and their gardens, their peaceful cities, and their profound spirituality. You carry the lesson of their transformation. That all things must change, all things must eventually return to the source from which they arose. And that this is not tragedy, but completion. Not ending, but transformation into something subtler and more profound. The oceans of Thalassara flow eternally, their bioluminescence pulsing in patterns that seem almost to contain meaning, almost to be the voice of the Andari still singing to the cosmos, singing the song that they learned in the tides so many eons ago. The cities stand silent yet alive, their stones gradually becoming earth, their crystals slowly dissolving back into the rock from which they were formed. And in the stars above, the light of Zephyris continues to shine, an eternal beacon, a patient reminder that consciousness itself is eternal, that love and beauty persist beyond any individual form. Rest now in this peace. Let the story settle into your deepest being. Let it become part of the fabric of your consciousness. You have journeyed across the void. You have descended into a world of extraordinary beauty. You have learned the history and spirituality and wisdom of a great civilization. You have witnessed how beings can live together in harmony, how consciousness can express itself through culture and art and technology, while remaining true to deepest values. And you have witnessed how even the greatest civilizations must eventually transform, must eventually allow their forms to dissolve, so that what they truly are, consciousness, wisdom, love, can persist in subtler forms. The silence now deepens. The sounds of the ocean grow fainter, more distant. The light of the moons and stars gradually fades as sleep becomes complete. You sink deeper and deeper into the well of darkness and rest, supported by an awareness that all is well, that you are safe, that beneath the surface of this moment lies an infinite depth of consciousness that holds and nurtures all being. The last song of the Andari echoes in the depths of your mind. Not a melody that has ended, but one that continues eternally, beyond time and form. A song that will always be singing in the foundations of existence. And as you rest in that song, surrounded by the peace and beauty of Thalassara and the wisdom of the Andari civilization, you finally surrender completely to sleep. Sleep now. Rest now. Know that you are held by forces infinitely larger and more gracious than any individual consciousness. Know that peace is not something you must struggle to achieve, but something that already exists, waiting only for you to allow yourself to experience it. Know that in this moment, and in all moments, there is beauty, there is harmony, there is love expressing itself through the infinite variety of creation. The transmission fades. The archive closes gently, like the final page of a book being carefully turned, and you drift into the deepest, most restful, most complete sleep, safe, nourished, and held by a consciousness as vast and patient and loving as the oceans of Thalassara themselves. Rest, all is well. The circle is complete.